Commander Rian Hale had always been aware that humans were not like the rest of the galaxy. Even as a young boy growing up on Terran Prime, he could sense the stories of humanity's strange and dangerous past, whispered in hushed tones by older officers and historians. Humanity had earned a reputation over centuries. Some called it legendary, others called it terrifying. People spoke of Deathworlders, humans who had been bred, trained, and tempered in the harshest environments ever known. Their home planet, a place full of deadly storms, poisonous flora, vicious predators, and unpredictable terrain, was unlike any other world in known space. A child who could survive there could survive anywhere. A soldier raised there was almost impossible to defeat, and that was what made the galaxy both fear and respect Earth and its people. Rian grew up hearing tales about his ancestors, men and women who faced impossible odds just to survive each day. These were not simple survival stories. They were accounts of battles fought not only against alien creatures but against nature itself. On Terran Prime, the weather could kill as easily as any predator. Violent storms would appear without warning, ripping through valleys and flattening cities in minutes. Plants and fungi, seemingly harmless at first glance, could release toxins strong enough to kill an adult human in a few breaths. And then there were the animals. Some were huge, others small, but all were deadly. The slightest mistake could end a life. But humans learned, adapted, and thrived. It was this relentless adaptation that shaped the Deathworlder spirit, a combination of intelligence, endurance, and raw instinct. By the time Rian reached adolescence, he had been taught that every step he took mattered. Every decision could mean life or death, and that survival was not just physical, it was mental and emotional as well. Despite the dangerous upbringing, there was pride in it. Rian's parents, both officers in the Terran Defense Network, often told him that being a Deathworlder was a privilege as much as it was a responsibility. "We are the last line," his father would say, his eyes serious but full of unspoken history. "We are humanity's shield, the ones who will stand when others run." His mother, calmer and wise, would add, "We are feared because we are relentless. We are respected because we endure. And someday, the galaxy will know why humans never give up." These words were repeated in his training, in classrooms, in simulations, and on the field. Every mission, every drill, every struggle was a reminder of the heavy weight carried by anyone born on Terran Prime. Humans were not the largest, fastest, or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but they were among the most cunning and resilient. That combination alone made them formidable. By the time Rian became an officer, he had seen many of the galaxy's civilizations up close. He had served on diplomatic missions, peacekeeping assignments, and observation fleets. He knew that humans had a unique position among the stars. Most species followed strict hierarchies, relied heavily on technology, or avoided danger whenever possible. Humans, on the other hand, thrived in uncertainty. They used creativity, intuition, and risk-taking to survive situations others would avoid entirely. Some species called it recklessness, others called it genius. For Rian, it was simply the way humans had evolved. The galaxy might underestimate them, but that underestimation often turned into a deadly mistake. Despite humanity's reputation, Earth had chosen a path of relative isolation. Humans did not invade or conquer for the sake of power. They rarely interfered in the conflicts of other civilizations unless it directly threatened their safety or values. Many in the galaxy believed Earth was cautious to the point of cowardice, but Rian understood the deeper reasoning. Humans were not warmongers by nature, they were survivors. Every act of aggression carried a cost, and humans calculated those costs carefully. But they also had a strong sense of justice and moral duty, a trait that could drive them into action when the situation demanded it. And this was where Rian's story began, at the intersection of human caution and human courage. Far away, in a distant sector of the galaxy, the Norethi civilization was facing extinction. Unlike humans, the Norethi had always relied on diplomacy and negotiation to solve conflicts. Their technology was advanced, but their ability to defend themselves in battle was limited. The Varkan Dominion, a ruthless empire known for its expansionist and merciless ways, had started targeting the Norethi systematically. Entire cities were being destroyed, populations enslaved, and cultural landmarks erased. For the Norethi, survival was slipping through their fingers like sand. In desperation, they sent out an SOS signal, one last plea for help from anyone who could hear it. They had no idea if their cry would reach someone powerful, someone capable of saving them. The SOS traveled through the void, crossing sectors and light years until it arrived at a Terran relay station. Rian was the officer on duty when the signal first appeared on his screens. He immediately recognized the signs of a civilization in extreme distress. The transmission was fragmented, filled with panic, fear, and coded messages of mass extermination. Most officers would have noted it and filed it for higher authorities to decide. But Rian couldn't ignore it. Something about the way the Norethi communicated, the urgency in their voices, even though it was just a transmission, spoke to him. He felt the weight of responsibility immediately. Humans may have chosen isolation, but they could not simply watch a civilization die when they had the power to intervene. At the council meetings that followed, the debate was intense. Many leaders cited treaties, political consequences, and the risk of provoking the Varkan Dominion. Earth had always maintained neutrality, and there was fear that interfering might draw humanity into an interstellar war it did not seek. But Rian's arguments were passionate and clear. The Norathi were on the brink of annihilation, and inaction was a choice to allow genocide. He reminded them that humans had survived and thrived in the deadliest environments imaginable, not because they avoided danger, but because they faced it with courage, skill, and relentless determination. The room was divided, and for hours the discussion continued without resolution. During this period, Rian reflected on what it meant to be a humanity's greatest strength was its ability to endure extreme conditions, but it was also their ability to act decisively when necessary. Other species might calculate endlessly, waiting for perfect conditions, while humans would adapt, improvise, and confront danger directly. This was not recklessness. It was intelligence, born from experience and evolution. And if the galaxy would witness humanity's strength, it would not come from conquest or pride, it would come from a sense of duty, a moral code that refused to ignore cries for help. The Norathi SOS became more than just a signal. For Rian, it became a test of humanity's principles. Could humans stay true to their values and act in time? Could they step out of isolation and face a threat that others had already deemed too dangerous? The answer, he knew, would define not just the fate of the Norathi, but the role of humans in the galaxy for generations to come. As the days passed, the SOS transmissions continued to arrive, each painting a grimmer picture of the Norathi's plight. The message was clear. Failure to respond quickly meant extinction. Rian understood the stakes. The galaxy might not yet fully grasp the true capabilities of humans, but he knew the potential that lay in trained death. The SOS had awakened something fundamental in him and in the officers around him, a recognition that some crises could not be ignored, no matter the political consequences. Humanity had always survived the impossible. Now, faced with the impossible plight of another species, they were being called to act once more. By the time the first decision meetings concluded, Rian had begun preliminary preparations. He did not wait for unanimous approval. He studied the fleet, reviewed simulations, and ran contingency plans in case Earth authorized or denied action. His focus was unshakable. The story of the Deathworlders had always been one of preparation, adaptation, and survival, and he intended to uphold that legacy. The galaxy had underestimated humans before, often at its own peril. Now, with the Norathi in peril and the SOS signaling humanity's chance to intervene, Rian felt a surge of purpose that reminded him of every lesson he had learned. Since childhood on Terran Prime, the Norathi's SOS had not reached a neutral species, it had reached humans, the most dangerous survivors in the galaxy. And while humanity had chosen isolation for centuries, they had never been indifferent to suffering. The SOS had awakened the potential wrath of the Deathworlders, and though it was not yet unleashed, the story of humanity's involvement in this distant conflict had quietly begun. Commander Rian Hale, shaped by the harshest environment in known space, guided by duty and moral conviction, knew one truth. When someone cried for help, humanity could not ignore it, and what would follow would be both terrifying and legendary in equal measure. In those early days, before any action was taken, the galaxy remained unaware of the storm that was gathering. To most, Earth and its people were isolated, cautious, and careful. To Rian and the officers who understood what it meant to be a Deathworlder, however, the SOS was a spark, and sparks, in the right conditions, could start a fire that no one could control. A fire born not of anger, but of responsibility, skill, and the relentless drive to survive and protect. The Norathi's message was simple: they needed help. But to the Deathworlders, it was more than that. It was a call to demonstrate what humans had always been capable of, even if the galaxy had long forgotten. The galaxy would soon see that humans were more than their diplomacy, more than their technology, and more than the myths whispered in fear by other species. Humans were survivors, fighters, and, when necessary, saviors. And the SOS, drifting quietly across the void of space, had found its answer in the most unlikely, dangerous, and determined beings it could have hoped for. The SOS signal had reached Earth, and Commander Rian Hale could no longer ignore it. Every day, the transmissions grew more desperate, painting a picture of a civilization on the brink of annihilation. The Norathi, a gentle and highly intelligent, the species, had always relied on diplomacy to navigate the dangers of the galaxy. They were skilled in negotiation, trade, and scientific advancement, but they were not fighters. Their technology, while advanced in some areas like energy management and communications, was not designed for war. Their weapons were primarily defensive, and their planetary defense systems were limited. Against the Varkan Dominion, a violent empire known for its ruthless expansion and military aggression, the Northeast stood little chance. Entire cities had been destroyed, populations wiped out, and their leaders captured or killed. The first time Rian viewed the SOS in full, he felt a cold weight in his chest. The transmission was fragmented and garbled, but the urgency was unmistakable. The Norathi were pleading, not demanding. They were begging for someone, anyone, to come and save them. Rian's training had prepared him for war, for combat, and for making life or death decisions. But this was different. This was about deciding whether to intervene in a crisis that, by the galaxy's standard rules, was none of Earth's business. Many officers would have recorded the signal and left the response to politicians, not written. He understood the gravity of the moment. In the council chambers, discussions were tense. Leaders from Earth's high command debated the situation endlessly. Some argued that any intervention could provoke the Varkan Dominion and drag humanity into a war it did not need. Treaties, alliances, and the risk of diplomatic fallout were cited again and again. Neutrality had been a core principle for Earth for centuries. Humanity had survived because it chose caution over conflict in times when the stakes were uncertain. But others, inspired by Rian's insistence, argued differently. They reminded the Council that neutrality was meaningless if it allowed a civilization to be exterminated. Morality, duty, and the honor of humanity were at stake, and ignoring the SOs could stain the human legacy forever. Meanwhile, the situation for the Norethi continued to deteriorate. Reports intercepted by Earth's intelligence network revealed the extent of the Varkan Dominion's brutality. Entire cities were reduced to rubble overnight. The Dominion's ships were fast, heavily armed, and equipped with advanced weapons that could annihilate an entire planetary defense grid in minutes. Survivors described the horror of Varkan occupation, family members taken, structures destroyed, and cultural artifacts deliberately obliterated to erase the identity of the Norethi people. Their civilization was being erased not just physically but psychologically, and the galaxy seemed indifferent. Rian Hale could not stand idly by. He began reviewing the fleet's capabilities, assessing the ships, weapons, and strategies at his disposal. The Terran Defense Network was unlike any other military in the galaxy. While humans did not boast the largest fleets, their ships were versatile, heavily shielded, and operated with tactics honed over generations of survival. Each vessel carried a crew trained to handle extreme situations. Much like the soldiers raised on Terran Prime, these crews were capable of improvising, adapting, and executing maneuvers that no alien fleet would anticipate. Rian knew that the Deathworlder fleet could make a difference, but only if they acted decisively and quickly. In the days that followed, Rian met with other officers to simulate possible responses. They ran countless scenarios, mapping out approaches to the Norethi system, calculating the Dominion fleet's strengths and weaknesses, and testing strategies to minimize casualties while maximizing impact. While these exercises were technical, they were also emotionally taxing. Every simulation reminded Rian of the lives at stake. The Norethi were not just coordinates in space, they were individuals, families, and communities who trusted that someone, somewhere, might hear their call for help. For Rian, the weight of that responsibility was enormous. While the council debated, Rian also studied the Norethi's culture. He learned about their values, their traditions, and their ways of life. They were peaceful, curious, and deeply connected to one another. They celebrated knowledge and cooperation rather than conquest. Their art, music, and literature reflected a civilization that prized empathy and intellect over aggression. To see such a culture targeted for extermination by the Varkan Dominion was deeply personal for Rian. It strengthened his resolve. He realized that this mission was not about politics, treaties, or territory. It was about saving lives and defending civilization itself. On the political side, the council remained divided. Some leaders feared that any intervention could spark a galactic incident, drawing humanity into a war they could not escape. Others argued that action was the only moral choice. The debates were heated, often lasting hours, but Rian remained focused. He knew that waiting too long could cost the Norethi their entire species. While the politicians argued, Rian and his team quietly prepared contingency plans, readying ships, crews, and resources. He knew that if Earth decided to act, they had to be prepared immediately. Speed and precision would determine success or failure. During this period, Rian also considered the human factor. Humans were not invincible, and even the Deathworlders had limits. The crews would face alien technology, hostile environments, and psychological pressure unlike anything they had encountered before. But humans had a unique advantage: the ability to adapt under pressure. Rian believed that while the Varkan Dominion relied on overwhelming firepower and intimidation, humans relied on strategy, ingenuity, and resilience. It was this combination that had allowed Earth to survive for centuries without being conquered or destroyed. The same principles would guide them in this mission. As the early days of preparation continued, the SOS signal brought more than just technical challenges, it brought emotion. Rian could hear the fear, hope, and desperation in the Norethi transmissions. He saw the images captured by their sensors: cities aflame, civilians fleeing, children crying for parents who were gone. These were not abstract numbers on a screen. They were real lives in danger. Every officer on Rian's team felt the weight of this reality. Some questioned the wisdom of intervening, while others were inspired by the opportunity to make a difference. For Rian, the choice was simple. Humanity could not stand by while genocide occurred. Meanwhile, the Varkan Dominion continued its campaign. Unaware that anyone had received the SOS, they assumed that the Northeast cries would vanish into the void, unheard and unanswered. Their arrogance blinded them to the possibility that a powerful and dangerous force like the Deathworlders could intervene. Rian understood this advantage. The Dominion underestimated humans because they had never faced them in the right conditions. Humanity's reputation as Deathworlders was known, but often dismissed as legend. This underestimation would prove critical when action was finally taken. During these early stages, Rian also worked to understand the limitations of his fleet. While humans were resilient and capable of extraordinary feats, there were risks. Resources were finite, and reinforcements would take time to arrive. Communications could be disrupted, and the Dominion was known for employing electronic warfare and sabotage. Every detail mattered. Rian meticulously coordinated logistics, ensuring that ships were ready, crews were briefed, and contingency plans were in place. Preparation, he knew, was just as important as courage. The Nurithi, unaware that humans were preparing to intervene, continued to send out signals. Their messages were filled with emotion, fear for their families, sorrow for lost lives, and hope that someone would come. Rian received each one personally, analyzing every piece of information for tactical value and understanding the human cost of delay. These transmissions became a driving force, motivating Rian and his team to act with urgency and precision. The situation was clear. The Norithi were in immediate danger, the Varkan Dominion was relentless, and time was running out. Earth's political debate was ongoing, but Rian knew that when the decision came, humanity had to be ready. He had prepared his fleet, trained his crews, and studied the enemy. The Deathworlders' readiness was not just technical, it was mental, emotional, and moral. They were prepared to face danger because they had been forged to endure it, and they were prepared to act because they understood the cost of inaction. Through all of this, Rian reflected on humanity's position in the galaxy. Earth's isolation had protected them for centuries, but it had also created a perception of detachment. Few species realized that humans were capable of swift, decisive, and overwhelming action when duty demanded it. The Norithi SOS would be humanity's first major test in this distant sector of the galaxy. How they responded would define not just the fate of one species, but humanity's legacy. By the time the early situation phase reached its peak, Rian and his team were ready. Ships were positioned, crews were trained, and strategies were finalized. Every officer understood the stakes. Failure was not an option. The galaxy had underestimated humans for centuries, but the Narathi crisis would change that perception forever. The Deathworlders were prepared to act, and when the time came, the SOS would be answered not with words, but with decisive, unstoppable force. The early situation set the tone for everything that followed. It revealed the moral and strategic dilemmas humanity faced, the complexity of galactic politics, and the bravery required to act in the face of overwhelming odds. It also highlighted Rian Hale's character, resolute, compassionate, and unyielding. The stage was set, the fleets were ready, and the galaxy remained unaware that a storm was quietly gathering, one that would soon make the Northeast cries impossible to ignore. This phase, filled with tension, preparation, and moral reckoning, was a testament to the unique qualities that defined humans: the ability to endure, to adapt, and to rise to challenges that others would deem impossible. As the SOS continued to echo across space, Rian Hale understood one undeniable truth. Action was coming, and when it did, it would come with the full force of humanity's determination and skill. The early situation had tested their patience, their judgment, and their readiness, but it had also forged a path that would lead them to intervention, conflict, and ultimately, resolution. The situation for the Norithi had grown increasingly desperate, and Commander Rian Hale could feel the tension building across the fleet. The early days of preparation had revealed not only the extent of the Varkan Dominion's brutality, but also the moral and strategic weight that this mission carried. The Council on Earth remained divided, yet the pressure of the incoming transmissions left no room for delay. Each new SOS broadcast painted an even grimmer picture of the Norithi's suffering. Whole cities reduced to ash, thousands of civilians fleeing through broken streets, and vital infrastructure destroyed beyond repair. The desperation in the messages was unmistakable. A voice crying from the void for anyone with the power to intervene. Rian and his officers had grown restless. While the council continued to debate political consequences, the Deathworlder crews had begun preparing themselves as if action could be required at any moment. For them, there was no question. They were ready to respond to injustice wherever it arose. The discipline of the Deathworlders meant that preparation was not simply about weapons and shields. It involved mental readiness, simulations, survival strategies, and understanding the enemy's behavior. They studied Varkan tactics, learning how the Dominion manipulated fear, technology, and overwhelming force to conquer civilizations quickly. They examined every recorded battle, every known maneuver, and every form of strategic deception, knowing that understanding the enemy could mean the difference between saving the Norithi or witnessing their extinction. As the days passed, the transmissions from the Norithi began to convey more than mere fear. They carried hope. Though their situation was dire, they still believed someone would respond. someone powerful enough to make a difference. Rian could feel the weight of that hope pressing upon him. It was a responsibility he could not ignore. The rising conflict was not only external, against the Varkan Dominion, but internal. Within the council chambers and within the hearts of those deciding whether to act, the debate over morality versus political consequence intensified, and the window for decisive action was narrowing with every passing hour. Meanwhile, intelligence reports showed that the Varkan Dominion was not slowing its campaign. They were ruthless, strategic, and relentless, often striking without warning and targeting both military installations and civilian populations. Unlike humans, who valued life and strategy, the Dominion relied on intimidation, overwhelming force, and fear. They expected submission, and they believed the galaxy would comply without resistance. Their arrogance was enormous, and they did not consider that the Deathworlders might intervene. For Rian, this arrogance was both a warning and an opportunity. The Varkan Dominion underestimated humans, as many civilizations had done before, and that underestimation could become their greatest weakness. The rising conflict was also technological. The Dominion had begun deploying advanced ships equipped with powerful shields, long-range weapons, and electronic warfare systems capable of disrupting communications. They were moving faster than expected, conquering systems before relief could arrive. For the Northi, every passing hour increased the probability of annihilation. For Rian, it was a race against time. Every decision, every preparation, every strategy had to account for the possibility that the Northi might not survive long enough for Earth's political leaders to authorize intervention. The moral urgency was clear. Inaction was no longer an option. Every delay could mean death. On the human side, Rian's fleet continued to train rigorously. They conducted long simulations, running scenarios of boarding hostile ships, defending civilian populations, and neutralizing enemy strongholds. The crews of the Terran ships were drilled to respond to multiple threats simultaneously: aerial attacks, electronic interference, sabotage, and ambushes. They practiced navigating treacherous space environments, from asteroid fields to volatile star systems, knowing that the Dominion might try to lure them into dangerous terrain. The training was exhausting, yet it forged confidence, teamwork, and adaptability, qualities that would be essential when facing an enemy that expected submission rather than resistance. The psychological aspect of the rising conflict was perhaps the most intense. Crews had been trained to manage fear, but the knowledge that the Northi were counting on them added a layer of emotional intensity. They were not simply preparing for battle. They were preparing to intervene in the survival of an entire civilization. The moral stakes were enormous. Every Deathworlder understood that failure was unacceptable. The Dominion had already shown that hesitation could lead to mass death, and the crew internalized the need for speed and precision. For many of them, this was the first real test of their skills in an actual crisis of this scale, and the tension in the fleet was palpable. As intelligence continued to stream in, the rising conflict escalated into direct confrontation even before Earth officially decided to act. Varkan scouts had begun detecting Terran observation ships near Northi space, and their response was swift and aggressive. The Dominion deployed fast attack units designed to intercept and destroy smaller fleets, testing Earth's patience and capabilities. For Rian, these encounters were warnings that time was running out. He realized that if the Council continued to debate without decisive action, the Norethi would be lost. The rising conflict had reached a critical point, where delay itself became a dangerous adversary. The political dimension was equally complex. Some council members continued to fear diplomatic repercussions, the possibility of the Dominion retaliating against Earth, and the unknown consequences of a full-scale engagement. Others, inspired by Rian's determination, argued passionately that the moral obligation to act outweighed any political concern. The debate was heated, with tempers flaring and alliances forming on both sides. For Rian, the Council's indecision was frustrating. He knew that while debate was necessary, the longer action was postponed, the higher the human cost would be. The rising conflict was no longer just about the Northi. It had become a test of humanity's principles, courage, and willingness to act when others faltered amidst the tension. Rian began communicating secretly with trusted allies within the fleet. While awaiting official orders, they discreetly prepared emergency plans, ensuring that ships could be launched at a moment's notice. Crews were briefed on the gravity of the situation, emphasizing both the danger and the moral imperative. They ran covert simulations to anticipate Dominion strategies, considering every possible scenario. These preparations were clandestine, necessary to maintain readiness while the political machinery slowly ground through its deliberations. The Northi, meanwhile, were not passive victims. Despite their fear, they tried to fight back in small ways: defensive maneuvers, attempts to hide populations, and sabotage against the Dominion. However, their efforts were limited, and they had no hope of stopping the larger Varkan fleet. Each broadcast they sent carried a mixture of despair and determination, a message that resonated deeply with Rian and his team. It reminded them of the stakes. These were not abstract beings. They were living, breathing people relying entirely on someone else to protect them. As the rising conflict intensified, Rian realized that the human response had to be swift and decisive. The Dominion's aggression was escalating, and every delay could result in irreversible losses. The crews trained harder, prepared faster, and analyzed every piece of intelligence with relentless focus. The rising conflict had transformed from a distant threat into an immediate reality, one that required courage, ingenuity, and precise coordination. It was a challenge the Deathworlders had been prepared for their entire lives, yet its magnitude was unprecedented. Within the fleet, the human officers also dealt with internal tension. Some crew members questioned the wisdom of confronting such a powerful empire without explicit authorization. Others feared the potential for massive casualties. But Rian emphasized the stakes in every discussion. The Norathi were on the brink of extinction, and humanity had the capability to act decisively. Hesitation was no longer acceptable. Every member of the fleet understood that their mission was not merely a strategic choice but a moral one. The rising conflict also revealed the Dominion's arrogance. They continued to assume that humanity would remain neutral, that the Terran fleet would hesitate. They had underestimated the skills, preparation, and resolve of the Death. Rion knew this underestimation was an advantage, one that could be leveraged to save the Norathi. While the Dominion's fleet was formidable, it had never faced opponents who combined adaptability, resilience, and moral determination in the same way. The rising conflict had created a tension where human strength, strategy, and decisiveness could turn the tide. Even before the first shot was fired, as transmissions from the Norathi grew increasingly desperate, the urgency for a decision became impossible to ignore. The rising conflict was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. Every second that passed without intervention increased the likelihood that entire populations would be wiped out. For Rian, this was the defining moment of leadership. To wait for perfect authorization could mean failure, but acting too hastily carried risk. Yet, in his mind, there was only one right choice. Humanity could not allow genocide to occur when it had the power to intervene. The Varkan Dominion was aggressive, arrogant, and confident. The Norathi were on the brink of extinction, their hope fading with every passing moment. The Terran fleet, under Rion's careful guidance, was prepared to respond. The rising conflict had tested patience, strategy, and moral courage, forging the crew into a focused, determined force. The tension, anticipation, and urgency created an atmosphere where every decision mattered, every action counted, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The rising conflict had escalated to a point where delay was no longer possible. The Dominion's expansion, the Council's indecision, the Norathi's desperation, and the preparations of the Deathworlders converged into a moment of inevitable confrontation. For Rian Hale, the rising conflict was not just a test of skill, it was a test of humanity's ability to act with courage, precision, and moral clarity. It would define the next chapter of the galaxy's history, and the choices made in this phase would determine whether the Norathi survived or perished, where the moral, strategic, and emotional tensions would collide, forcing humanity to act decisively. The rising conflict had created an environment of urgency, risk, and anticipation, proving that the galaxy was about to witness the full measure of the Deathworlder legacy. Rian Hale and his fleet were ready, and the rising storm of events would soon escalate beyond anything the galaxy had anticipated. The galaxy had reached a critical moment. The rising tension that had been building around the Norathi crisis, the Varkan Dominion's aggression, and the political indecision on Earth had now transformed into something far more urgent. The breaking point had arrived. Commander Rian Hale could feel it in every fiber of his being, the sense that the time for hesitation was over, that every second lost could mean the difference between life and extinction. The Norathi's transmissions, once desperate calls for help, had become near pleas, almost frantic messages that carried the weight of a civilization's survival. Entire populations were now on the edge of annihilation, and the Dominion showed no signs of stopping Earth's Council, which had been mired in debates over protocol, neutrality, and political consequence, could no longer delay. Reports from the fleet indicated that the Varkan Dominion's ships had begun overtly targeting civilian Norathi vessels. The evacuations were failing, defensive systems were collapsing, and the Dominion's pace of destruction had accelerated. Every simulation Rian had conducted, every strategic calculation he had made, indicated that the Norathi would not survive another day without immediate intervention. He understood the gravity of the situation. Hesitation was now tantamount to complicity. Inaction was no longer an option. Rian called an emergency meeting with his most trusted officers. The urgency in his voice left no room for debate. "We have one chance to act," he said. "One chance to save them. If we wait any longer, it will be too late. This is our responsibility, not just as soldiers, but as humans. The Norathi are counting on us, and we cannot fail them." The officers nodded, understanding that this was more than a mission, it was a moral imperative, a test of humanity's courage and readiness. Their training, experience, and resilience would now be put to the ultimate test. At the same time, the Dominion's arrogance continued to play into humanity's hands. The Varkan fleets assumed that Earth's hesitation meant fear, that humans would not intervene. They underestimated not only the capabilities of the Deathworlders but also the determination that had been forged through centuries of survival on Terran Prime. The Dominion believed themselves invincible, confident that they could crush the Norethi and return to their empire unchallenged. Little did they know that the storm they were provoking was one they could not survive. The breaking point was not only a matter of time and urgency, it was also a psychological turning point. The human officers, while trained for war, had been restrained by protocols, rules, and political caution. Now, with the evidence of mass extermination undeniable and the Norethi's plight fully apparent, that restraint vanished. The crew, the fleet, and even Earth's leadership began to realize that this was no longer a theoretical scenario. The Norethi were on the verge of extinction, and the moral, strategic, and emotional demands of the moment required immediate action. Rian oversaw the final preparations. The fleet had been positioned in optimal launch formations, ships refueled, crews briefed on every contingency. Every vessel carried the best of Terran technology, reinforced hulls, adaptive shields, and weapons capable of precision strikes that minimized collateral damage. These were not just tools of war, they were instruments of rescue, designed to save lives while neutralizing threats. Rian understood that the Dominion's overconfidence could be leveraged strategically. Their arrogance made them predictable in certain ways, but they were still dangerous. Any miscalculation could result in heavy losses. Yet failure to act was far worse. The first direct confrontation came unexpectedly. Varkan scouts, detecting Terran ships near the Norethi system, launched preemptive attacks. Their assumption was simple: intimidate the humans and force a retreat. They did not know that the Deathworlders thrived in situations where the odds were stacked against them. The fleet responded with precision, neutralizing the attacking scouts efficiently. Every move was calculated to demonstrate power without unnecessarily provoking escalation. Rian had always believed that showing restraint and control was as important as overwhelming force. The Dominion learned quickly, however, that humans were not bound by the same assumptions that guided their actions. Meanwhile, the Norethi, hearing that humans were finally moving to act, experienced a mixture of relief and renewed fear. Relief because hope had finally arrived, and fear because they had witnessed the Dominion's power firsthand and understood the danger humans faced in confronting it. Yet the very presence of the Terran fleet inspired courage among the Norethi. For the first time in weeks, they dared to believe that their survival might be possible. The breaking point had ignited a chain reaction, not only in humanity's decision to act but in the morale and hope of those they were striving to save. Back on Earth, the Council formally authorized the intervention. The decision was unanimous, but came with the weight of potential consequences. Some feared political fallout, while others worried about the human cost. But all understood that the Norethi had reached the edge of oblivion, and humanity could no longer wait. The breaking point, in this sense, was a convergence of necessity, morality, and opportunity. The timing was critical. Any further delay would have been catastrophic. As the fleet launched, the magnitude of the operation became clear. Ships moved in coordinated formations, utilizing advanced navigation systems to avoid hazards, maximize efficiency, and prepare for potential encounters with Dominion forces. Every crew member understood their role and the stakes involved. The breaking point had transformed abstract duty into immediate, tangible action. For the first time, the full power of the Deathworlders was being directed towards saving a civilization that could not defend itself. During the transit, Rian reflected on the human capacity for decisive action. Earth had cultivated caution, patience, and strategic planning for centuries. Yet it had also nurtured a species capable of swift and deadly intervention when moral and practical imperatives aligned. The breaking point was more than a military escalation. It was the moment when restraint gave way to action, when strategy converged with moral responsibility, and when humanity's preparedness and courage would be fully tested. The Dominion, still unaware of the full scale of human response, made several tactical errors. They assumed hesitation meant weakness and misinterpreted human caution as indecision. Rian exploited this miscalculation, deploying ships in ways that neutralized key Dominion assets before they could react. The first skirmishes, small but significant, demonstrated that human precision and adaptability could overcome the Dominion's numerical and technological superiority. The breaking point, therefore, was not only a psychological and moral event, it was a tactical advantage that Rian leveraged with skill and foresight. On board the flagship, Rian's crew experienced both tension and exhilaration. They were about to intervene in a war zone, protect a civilization at risk of extinction, and face an enemy that had never encountered humans in their full capacity. The weight of responsibility was immense, yet it galvanized the crew's determination. They were prepared for the worst and motivated by the knowledge that success meant survival for millions. The breaking point had crystallized purpose, focus, and unity in the fleet. The first direct engagement with the Dominion's main forces occurred near the outer Norethi systems. The Dominion, still expecting minimal resistance, was caught off guard by the coordinated human assault. Rian had instructed his fleet to disable rather than destroy where possible, prioritizing civilian safety and minimizing collateral damage. The humans' tactical superiority, combined with their adaptability and courage, overwhelmed Dominion forces in ways they had never experienced. The breaking point, which had forced humanity to act decisively, became the turning point in the conflict itself. The Northy, observing the engagement from hidden locations, felt a renewed sense of hope. The fleet's precise maneuvers, rapid neutralization of Dominion scouts, and protective formation around civilian evacuation points were a testament to human skill, training, and ingenuity. For them, the breaking point was not abstract, it was visible, tangible, and inspiring. They began to understand that the Deathworlders were not just fighters, but guardians, willing to risk everything to preserve life. Simultaneously, Rian had to manage the political dimension. Even as the fleet engaged, Earth's leadership monitored every move. Reports, tactical updates, and real-time analysis streamed back, allowing the Council to remain informed. This coordination ensured that humanity's intervention remained effective, balanced, and morally grounded. The breaking point, therefore, was multidimensional, operational, moral, and political. Every action, every decision, and every maneuver mattered. As the battle continued, the Dominion realized that their assumptions had been wrong. They had underestimated human resolve, adaptability, and precision. The breaking point had revealed the true nature of the Deathworlders, a species that could survive extreme adversity, act decisively under pressure, and leverage both intelligence and courage to overcome superior numbers. The psychological impact on the Dominion was profound, and their morale began to waver even before major losses occurred. Meanwhile, the Northy were guided by human direction to execute evacuation plans efficiently. Civilians were transported to safer systems, defensive structures were fortified, and critical infrastructure was protected wherever possible. Human intervention did not simply destroy the enemy, it enabled the Northy to survive and retain the foundations of their civilization. The breaking point had unlocked the potential not only for military success but also for the preservation of a culture under threat. By the end of the initial engagements, the breaking point had shifted the balance. Humanity had acted decisively, transforming hesitation into courage, preparation into action, and strategy into tangible results. The Dvarkan Dominion had suffered unexpected setbacks, while the Northy's survival chances had dramatically improved. What had begun as a moment of moral and strategic urgency had become a turning point in the conflict itself. Rian understood that this was only the beginning. The breaking point had set events into motion that would shape the outcome of the Northy crisis. Humanity's role in the galaxy, and the perception of the Deathworlders by every civilization that observed the unfolding events. It was a demonstration of moral clarity, operational precision, and the unstoppable will of a species forged in the harshest environments known. In the quiet moments between engagements, Rian reflected on the lessons of the breaking point. Humanity had been tested not by enemy strength alone, but by indecision, urgency, and moral responsibility. The breaking point had proven that humans were capable of confronting overwhelming odds, acting decisively to save lives, and leveraging every skill and advantage to achieve success. It was a moment that defined not only the current conflict but the enduring legacy of the Deathworlders throughout the galaxy. Humanity had moved past hesitation and entered decisive action. The breaking point had been reached, and with it came the realization that the Northy might yet survive, that the Dominion had underestimated the wrong species, and that the galaxy would never again view humans as passive observers. The momentum generated in this phase would carry forward into confrontation, resolution, and ultimately, the liberation of the Northy. The battle had reached a critical point, and Commander Rian Hall knew that the next few hours would determine the fate of the Northy civilization. After days of preparation, tension, and initial skirmishes, humanity had decisively entered the fray. The Dvarkan Dominion, confident in their strength and used to swift victories, had been caught off guard by the strategic brilliance and sheer resilience of the Deathworlder fleet. For the first time, they faced an enemy that did not falter in the face of danger, an enemy that adapted and responded with intelligence, creativity, and unwavering courage. The resolution of the conflict was now underway, and the galaxy was about to witness the full measure of human ingenuity and determination. The Terran fleet moved with precision, coordinated maneuvers, and speed. Each ship knew its role, from the frontline assault vessels to the support and logistics ships. Humans excelled at versatility, and this battle demonstrated it fully. But some ships engaged Dominion warships head-on, others executed flanking maneuvers, disrupted enemy communications, and created safe passages for civilian evacuation. Rian's strategy was clear: neutralize the threat to the Northy while minimizing civilian casualties. The complexity of the operation was immense, but humans were trained for extreme scenarios, and the Deathworlders thrived where others would fail. The Dominion, initially arrogant, struggled to adapt. Their ships, though technologically advanced, relied heavily on predictable formations and overwhelming firepower. They had never encountered an enemy that could anticipate their moves, counter with ingenuity, and exploit their weaknesses so efficiently. Every Dominion attack that had been meant to intimidate now met a precise countermeasure. Shields adapted, weapons redirected, and crews executed coordinated strategies that neutralized the Varkan threat piece by piece. Rian had anticipated their confidence and arrogance, using it to his advantage to control the flow of battle and protect the Norethi. As the fleet pressed forward, human pilots and officers executed maneuvers that were both daring and meticulous. Boarding parties were deployed with surgical precision, disabling key Dominion ships and capturing critical intelligence. Small teams infiltrated vessels, overriding systems, and ensuring that enemy fire could not harm civilians. Every action was calculated, every risk weighed, yet the Deathworlders operated with a fluidity and adaptability that made them unpredictable and deadly. The Dominion quickly realized that they were facing an opponent who did not merely fight, they outsmarted, outmaneuvered, and outlasted. Meanwhile, the Norethi, watching the unfolding events from the safety of hidden shelters and evacuation vessels, began to regain hope. They witnessed humans defending their cities, intercepting Dominion strikes, and providing safe corridors for escape. For the first time since the invasion began, they felt the possibility of survival. Children who had been crying for parents now clung to guardians with cautious optimism. Families trapped in destroyed cities began evacuating under human guidance, and the despair that had gripped their civilization started to lift. The resolution of the conflict was no longer abstract, it was tangible, visible, and profoundly moving. Rian understood the importance of this moment. Victory in battle was not enough. Humanity had to secure the Norethi's future. Every decision during the engagement considered long-term survival. Key infrastructure, including energy grids, communication hubs, and research facilities, was protected wherever possible. Civilians were guided to safe zones, and evacuation procedures were coordinated with precision. Human forces acted as both shield and spear, defending the vulnerable while striking decisively at the enemy. The resolution was unfolding not just as a military triumph but as a humanitarian operation, showcasing the depth of human strategy and moral responsibility. The Dominion, realizing that their usual tactics were failing, attempted to regroup and launch a coordinated counteroffensive. Their desperation was evident. Ships that had once operated with ruthless efficiency now faltered under the relentless human strategy. Human forces, anticipating these moves, adapted instantly, countering attacks, cutting off supply lines, and isolating enemy formations. The Dominion's morale began to crumble as they recognized that the Deathworlders were not just formidable, they were unstoppable under these circumstances. Every victory, no matter how small, reinforced human dominance in the theater of conflict and accelerated the resolution of the Norethi crisis. Simultaneously, Rian deployed specialized units to disable the Dominion's long-range weaponry. These units, operating with both speed and cunning, navigated treacherous zones filled with enemy fire, debris, and hidden traps. Their mission was not only to protect Norethi civilians but also to create openings for broader fleet movements. The precision and bravery displayed by these units exemplified the unique qualities of Deathworlders: adaptability, courage, and unyielding focus on the mission. By neutralizing critical threats, the humans ensured that the Varkan Dominion could no longer maintain a coherent defense, paving the way for a decisive resolution. Throughout the engagement, Rian maintained situational awareness at every level. Tactical updates flowed in constantly from every sector of the battle. His command decisions were swift, combining intelligence analysis with instinct, a hallmark of human leadership forged in the harshest environments of Terran Prime. By anticipating enemy movements and leveraging the strengths of his fleet, he created a cascading effect that disrupted Dominion coordination and magnified human impact. Each maneuver reinforced the inevitability of the resolution. The Norethi would survive, and the Varkan Dominion would be decisively defeated in this theater. The human advantage was not only technological or tactical but also psychological. The Dominion had assumed that they could intimidate and overpower any adversary. Human decisiveness, coordination, and unflinching courage shattered that assumption. Dominion crews, once confident in their superiority, now hesitated, doubted, and faltered. The breaking of their morale became a crucial element in the resolution, complementing the physical and strategic advantages of the Terran fleet. The Deathworlders had shown that sheer determination, strategic thinking, and moral clarity could overcome the best technology in largest numbers. As the battle progressed, key Dominion leaders were captured or neutralized, further destabilizing their forces. The remaining Varkan units faced relentless pressure from all sides. Human ships, operating with flexibility and coordination, created zones where Dominion reinforcements could not enter, gradually tightening the noose around the enemy. Each victory brought more freedom for the Norethi to rebuild defensive structures, rescue civilians, and secure vital resources. The resolution of the conflict was not instantaneous, but it became increasingly clear the Norethi would survive, and humanity's intervention had been decisive. At the same time, Rian ensured that human losses were minimized. While the Deathworlders were exceptionally skilled and resilient, no victory was worth unnecessary sacrifice. Shields were reinforced, tactical retreats were executed when necessary, and strategic strikes were employed to avoid direct confrontation with large enemy concentrations, unless success was almost certain. This careful balance of aggression and prudence exemplified the human approach, calculated action, driven by both skill and morality. The resolution was achieved not through reckless force but through superior planning, adaptability, and courage. By the end of the engagement, the Dominion's fleet had been shattered, key ships destroyed, leaders incapacitated, and morale broken. The Varkan forces retreated to regroup, leaving the Northeast system under human protection. The Northi, once on the brink of extinction, were now safe for the first time in weeks. Families reunited, cities were secured, and the immediate threat was neutralized. The resolution was complete. The Northi had survived, not through luck, but through the decisive action of humans who combined preparation, courage, and moral responsibility. In the aftermath, Rian oversaw the organization of humanitarian operations. Civilians were relocated to safe zones, medical teams treated the injured, and engineers began repairing critical infrastructure. The Northi, though traumatized, were guided by humans to regain a sense of stability and hope. For Rian, this was as significant as any military victory. Saving lives and preserving a civilization was the ultimate demonstration of human capability and moral duty. The resolution extended beyond battle. It ensured the continuation of a culture that had been threatened with annihilation. During these operations, the Northi expressed profound gratitude. They recognized that humanity had acted not out of self-interest, political gain, or conquest, but out of moral obligation and courage. Children who had feared the end of their civilization now smiled for the first time in weeks. Families who had been scattered reunited. Communities began to rebuild, and the Northi's faith in the possibility of survival was restored. The resolution had brought not just victory but restoration, hope, and renewed life. Rian, reflecting on the campaign, understood the broader implications. Humanity had demonstrated that it could act decisively in the face of moral crises, that it could combine skill, strategy, and courage to achieve what others deemed impossible. The resolution of the Northi conflict was a testament to the unique strengths of humans: resilience, adaptability, intelligence, and a deep sense of responsibility for others. It was a moment that would be remembered not only in Northi history but in the galaxy's awareness of humanity's potential. The Dominion, though defeated in this theater, would retreat to regroup. Rian knew that their arrogance and brutality could resurface in the future, but he also knew that they had now witnessed the full measure of human determination. The resolution of the conflict had established a new precedent. Humans would not stand idle in the face of injustice, and civilizations under threat could rely on their courage and skill. The galaxy had seen the power of the Deathworlders unleashed, and it had been both precise and principled. As calm began to return, Rian oversaw the final coordination of fleet movements. Dominion ships that remained were contained or monitored to prevent resurgence. Human forces began transitioning from combat operations to stabilization and protection. The Northi were now empowered to take control of their own defense. Guided by humans who had demonstrated both strength and compassion, the resolution was comprehensive, addressing both immediate threats and laying the foundation for long-term security. The sense of relief among the Northi was palpable. They had witnessed the arrival of a civilization capable of decisive, principled action. The Deathworlders had not only saved them from annihilation, but had demonstrated that morality, courage, and intelligence could combine to achieve outcomes that seemed impossible. The resolution of the conflict had become a defining moment, not just for the North, but for humanity's role in the galaxy. Commander Rian Hale reflected on the journey from the SOS's first transmission to the present. Each phase, the rising tension, the preparation, the breaking point, had led to this resolution. Humanity had acted decisively, saved a civilization, and established a precedent for future intervention in crises. The resolution was not merely a military victory, it was a triumph of moral courage, preparation, and skill. By the end of the operation, the Northi were safe, the Dominion forces in retreat, and the Terran fleet had demonstrated the full capabilities of the Deathworld. The resolution of this crisis marked a turning point for humanity's reputation in the galaxy, not as conquerors but as protectors, as a species capable of decisive action grounded in morality and skill. The lessons of this operation would resonate for generations, shaping strategies, alliances, and the perception of humans among countless civilizations. The battle was over, but the story of humanity's intervention, courage, and the preservation of the Northi would be remembered as a legendary chapter in galactic history. The resolution was complete, and it had been achieved not through luck, but through preparation, intelligence, skill, and an unyielding commitment to doing what was right. Humanity had acted when it mattered most, and the Northi had survived because of it. The battle had ended, but the galaxy had not forgotten the events that had unfolded in the Northi system. The Terran fleet, under Commander Rian Hale, had achieved a decisive victory over the Varkan Dominion, saving the Northi civilization from near extinction. Yet the calm that followed was not simple or easy. The aftermath of such a monumental conflict brought new challenges, reflection, and lessons for all involved. For Rian, his crew, and the Northi people, this period was about recovery, understanding, and contemplating the significance of what had been accomplished. The first priority in the aftermath was securing the Northy homeworld and surrounding systems. Though the Dominion fleet had been scattered and defeated, traces of their forces remained in nearby regions. Humans, aware that remnants of the enemy could regroup and pose future threats, maintained a vigilant presence. Patrol ships were deployed along the borders of Northy space, establishing surveillance points to detect any resurgence. Defensive grids were reinforced with technology that combined human ingenuity with Northy resources. This phase was not just about victory. It was about ensuring long-term security and stability for a civilization that had been on the brink of annihilation. As the immediate danger subsided, attention turned to the survivors. The Northy population had endured unimaginable trauma, entire cities destroyed, families lost, cultural sites ruined, and the constant threat of death. Human forces worked tirelessly to organize evacuation and relocation efforts. Safe zones were established, medical aid was distributed, and food and water supplies were coordinated to reach those in need. Teams of engineers, medics, and logistical experts, both human and Northy, collaborated to restore a sense of order. Even small acts, like rebuilding shelters or restoring communication networks, became symbols of hope. For the first time in weeks, Northy could begin to imagine a future beyond fear. Rion and his officers understood that this phase was critical. The physical reconstruction of Northy's systems was necessary, but the psychological healing of the population was equally important. They facilitated meetings between local Northy leaders and survivors to organize governance, community support, and cultural restoration. Education, essential services, and civic planning were reintroduced under human guidance. Children who had been hidden away or trapped in destroyed neighborhoods were reunited with families, and schools and learning centers began to reopen. For the Northy, the sense that their civilization could survive and even thrive was a profound emotional victory. The humans themselves faced challenges in the aftermath. The Terran fleet had operated at maximum capacity during the engagement, and crews were physically and mentally exhausted. Continuous high-stress operations, combat, and the responsibility of protecting an entire civilization had taken their toll. Commanders like Rion conducted debriefings and provided counseling, ensuring that crews could process the intensity of the experience. This was not merely a matter of morale, it was a recognition that human resilience had limits and that reflection, rest, and support were necessary to preserve their effectiveness for future operations. Meanwhile, the Northy began to express gratitude, admiration, and curiosity about the humans who had saved them. For many, humanity was no longer an abstract idea but a tangible force capable of courage, precision, and compassion. Children asked questions about human culture, technology, and history. Scholars and leaders of the Northy studied human tactics and strategy, intrigued by the combination of intelligence, moral resolve, and adaptability that had made the Deathworlders so formidable. The aftermath was not only about survival, it became an opportunity for cultural exchange, mutual learning, and the strengthening of interstellar bonds. The Varkan Dominion, meanwhile, was forced into a period of retreat and reconsideration. The unexpected defeat had shattered the perception of their invincibility. Internal dissent and shaken morale within their ranks created instability. For Rion and the Terran fleet, this was a relief, but it also served as a reminder that vigilance would always be necessary. The galaxy contained many powers, some hostile and some indifferent, and the survival of civilizations like the Northy depended on constant readiness, strategic foresight, and moral courage. The aftermath highlighted not only the immediate consequences of the battle, but also the long-term responsibilities that accompanied such decisive action. During this time, Rion took moments to reflect on the journey that had led to this point. From the first SOS transmission to the full engagement of the Terran fleet, every phase had tested humanity's patience, strategy, morality, and courage. The breaking point had been the moment when hesitation ended and decisive action began. The resolution had demonstrated the extraordinary combination of skill, planning, and moral responsibility that defined human intervention. And now, in the aftermath, the focus shifted to understanding the broader significance of these events. For Rion, the reflection was both personal and universal. It was about what it meant to act rightly, in the face of overwhelming odds, and how humanity's choices could influence the course of history. The Northy leaders invited Rion and key human officers to formal ceremonies, acknowledging the intervention. These events were deeply emotional, as they represented the survival of a people and the gratitude of an entire civilization. Speeches, celebrations, and rituals of remembrance honored those lost during the Dominion's assault, as well as the humans who had risked everything to save them. Rian observed these events quietly, understanding that recognition was not the goal of his actions. Yet witnessing the restoration of hope and the resilience of the Northy people reinforced the significance of what had been accomplished. Rian also reflected on the lessons for humanity. The mission had proven that moral responsibility, combined with preparation and courage, could achieve outcomes far beyond what sheer force alone could accomplish. Humans had acted decisively where others hesitated, had leveraged intelligence and strategy to protect the vulnerable, and had demonstrated the enduring value of compassion and principle. The aftermath was a moment to consider not only what had been done, but also what humanity's role in the galaxy could be moving forward. It was a reminder that power and responsibility were inseparable, and that the choices of one species could influence the fate of many others. For the Northy, the aftermath was a period of rebuilding and reflection as well. They had experienced the brink of annihilation and had witnessed firsthand the impact of intervention. Cultural, social, and technological restoration became urgent priorities. Humans worked alongside Northy engineers, scientists, and leaders to repair damaged infrastructure, restore communication networks, and safeguard critical resources. Education and cultural preservation efforts were emphasized, as leaders understood that survival alone was insufficient. The integrity of their civilization had to be maintained. The aftermath was as much about the future as it was about recovery, laying the groundwork for a thriving society that could endure future challenges. One of the most profound aspects of the aftermath was the strengthening of interstellar alliances. The Northy and humans established lasting bonds based on mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. These relationships would serve as a foundation for cooperation, knowledge exchange, and defense strategies in the future. Humanity's reputation as protectors, problem solvers, and moral actors had been solidified. The aftermath of this engagement was not simply the end of conflict, it was the creation of lasting diplomatic, cultural, and strategic connections that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations. The Terran fleet, now in a period of stabilization, began cataloging and analyzing every aspect of the mission. Lessons learned from the battle would inform training, strategy, and technological development. The successes and mistakes of the engagement were studied meticulously. Every maneuver, every decision, and every outcome was examined to ensure that the next mission would be even more precise and effective. The aftermath became an educational process as well, ensuring that the human capacity for intervention, protection, and moral courage continued to grow stronger throughout this period. Rian continued to reflect on leadership and responsibility. He considered the weight of decision-making when countless lives were at stake, the balance between strategic necessity and moral duty, and the ways in which courage could shape history. He thought about the countless individuals who had contributed to the success of the mission, the officers and crews, the planners and analysts, and even the civilians who had shown resilience and resourcefulness in the face of danger. The aftermath was as much about honoring these contributions as it was about rebuilding the Northy civilization. The Northy themselves began documenting the events from their perspective. They recorded stories of survival, heroism, and the arrival of the Terran fleet. These accounts were shared throughout their civilization to preserve memory, inspire future generations, and ensure that the sacrifices and courage displayed were never forgotten. For the Northy, the aftermath was a period of memory and acknowledgement, a time to reconcile grief with gratitude, loss with hope, and fear with resilience. For humanity, the aftermath provided lessons about its role in the galaxy. It was clear that the capacity to act decisively, morally, and intelligently could influence not only immediate survival but the long-term dynamics of interstellar politics. The mission had demonstrated that humans could serve as protectors, allies, and agents of positive change. The Northy SOS had been a call to action, and humanity had answered in a manner that combined skill, courage, and principle. Reflection on this experience reinforced the responsibility that came with power and the enduring impact of moral choices in shaping history. The final days of the aftermath were quieter, though still busy. Reconstruction continued, patrols remained vigilant, and humans began to prepare for eventual departure, confident that the Northy had the tools, guidance, and security to continue without constant oversight. Rian oversaw the final coordination of efforts, ensuring that the transition of responsibility to the Northy leadership was smooth and effective. Trust had been built, systems established, and a civilization preserved. The aftermath, in this sense, was complete. The immediate danger had passed, and the foundations for a secure, thriving future had been laid. Rian took time to consider the broader implications for Earth and the human species. Humanity's intervention had changed perceptions across the galaxy. They had acted where others hesitated, protected the vulnerable where others ignored danger, and demonstrated that power, when guided by principle, could achieve extraordinary outcomes. The aftermath was a period of both reflection and anticipation, recognizing that such moments would shape future policy, strategy, and moral decisions for generations of humans to come. In the quiet moments, Rian also reflected on the personal aspects of leadership. He considered the burden of command, the weight of responsibility, and the importance of courage and decisiveness. The aftermath was a time to process these experiences, to learn from successes and mistakes, and to prepare mentally and emotionally for future challenges. For him, the resolution of the conflict was not merely an external victory but a personal journey of understanding the true meaning of duty, compassion, and human potential. Ultimately, the aftermath reflection phase was a period of reconciliation, rebuilding, and understanding. The Northy had survived because humans had acted decisively and morally. The Dominion had been defeated, not only through force but through strategy, courage, and adaptability. Humanity had proven its capability to influence outcomes across the galaxy, and the lessons learned would resonate for centuries. The Northeast, scarred but resilient, began rebuilding their civilization with hope, knowledge, and gratitude. Humanity returned home, wiser, stronger, and more aware of the profound responsibilities that came with power. The events surrounding the North, the SOS, became a story told across civilizations, a testament to the courage, ingenuity, and moral clarity of humanity. Ryan Hale and his crew had not merely saved a species, they had demonstrated that action grounded in principle could change the course of history. The aftermath was a time to honor the sacrifices, reflect on the lessons, and ensure that the legacy of this intervention would shape the future of the galaxy. The Northie, forever grateful, began to thrive once more. Humanity, having proven its strength and moral responsibility, had set a precedent for intervention in crises. The aftermath had transformed fear into hope, despair into possibility, and chaos into stability. Reflection allowed both humans and Northie to understand the full weight and significance of their experiences. It was a time of learning, rebuilding, and preparing for whatever challenges the galaxy might bring next.